So we need to do a little bit of background because we've covered the Old English period and now we're going into the Middle English period, okay, which is a development of the language. When we talk about Middle English, we are talking about the English language. We don't call people Middle English people because that's just kind of weird. Call them medieval English people or something like that. And the Middle English period dates roughly, very roughly, from, if you want, 1100 to 1500. You can specifically date the beginning of Middle English. That is the earliest document we have in Middle English dates from 1135. It's in what's called the Peterborough Chronicle of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Peterborough version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And a lot of people will actually date the end of it to 1485. Okay. 1485, the Battle of Bosworth Field, when Henry Tudor defeats Richard III, whose skeleton was just discovered. Okay. It was actually discovered late August, but the archaeologists and scientists have just essentially proven that the skeleton that was discovered under a parking lot in Lincoln, no, not Lincoln. Is it Lincoln? Yeah, in Lincoln, is actually the skeleton of Richard III. And they did that by DNA tests with the bones that were found and surviving family members of Richard III. We'll talk more about that later. Okay? So here are just kind of the highlights. There's obviously a lot more going on. For the exam, you're not going to need to know necessarily exact dates, but this kind of stuff is important. Some of this showed up on the Old English exam. Dealing with William the Conqueror or William the Bastard, if you want. Some other things. So let's kind of go back again to get finished with, or to refresh your minds with the Old English. January 1st, Edward the Confessor dies. We've already told the story about the agreement, okay, that at least the French say Edward the Confessor had with William. Okay. Edward dies. 3 days later, the most powerful man in the kingdom, save Edward, probably arranges for his son to be made king, Harold Godwinson. All right? So Godwinson gets elected king by the Witan, the counselors, and word gradually reaches over to William, and he's rather put out about it, so he builds a navy to attack and invade England. It's the last time, by the way, that England was successfully invaded. Okay. September 25th, Harold's older brother, notice, is not happy, has not been happy for quite a while, that his younger brother was made king instead of him. Okay. And so he and King Harald Hardrada of Norway lead an invasion force into the north of England at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and they are defeated by Harold Godwinson. Okay? They're both killed. And then while up there, Harold receives word that William, the Bastard of Normandy, has landed on the southern coast. So now he's got to march to the south. If I remember right, it's a total of 240 miles, something like that. Okay? Raise an army and all that kind of stuff. He marches south. 1014, October 14th of 1066, a battle is pitched, and the English lose. Okay? They shouldn't have lost. They were winning for most of the day until the French tricked them by running away. Okay? Today that's a joke, but it wasn't a joke back then because they were kind of fearsome. The English lose. Harold Godwinson dies, anecdotally, with an arrow through the eye. Okay. Christmas Day, 1066, was crowned king. It doesn't mean everything's fine and dandy in England, however. He doesn't cement his crown, his kingship, for about another 20 years. That is, when he's crowned king, he's pretty much king of London. Because he has to go around through England and fight pitched battles over the next several years. Okay? This, by the way, it's during the period of William that pretty much all the major castles that are still in existence today, this is when they begin. The Anglo-Saxons did not build castles. Everything they built was built out of wood. It's gone, for the most part. I mean, there are still and things like that. Okay? Tower of London dates from William's time. Warwick Castle dates from William's time. Part of the big dirt mound at Warwick Castle dates from William's time. That's all that's left of the original. Okay? After William, his heirs become the successive kings. Okay? There's a little period in the 12th century, right around this time, when there's a civil war going on between William's grandson and I don't actually know the relation of Matilda. Do you know? Matilda to William. Stephen and Matilda are the two vying people. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is up until that period, you get this wonderful description of the kinds of tortures that are meted out to, the of whoever is particularly in power now. Throwing people in pits full of snakes and glass and spikes, and then throwing scorpions on top of them, and all kinds of wonderful stuff. Okay, so that goes on for a while. We have before King John, Richard the First. How do we know? What do we know about Richard the First? What's his nickname? Anybody? Come on, Robin Hood. Lionheart. Richard. I can't remember how to spell it. Coeur de Lion. Heart of a Lion. Okay. Why was he called that? Because he's always off fighting wars. Had a 10-year reign. Only months of it were spent in England. And yet the popular mythology is what? The English loved him. Okay? I mean, who do they get, in Robin Hood movies, who do they get to play Richard the Lionheart? Sean Connery, Patrick Stewart, he's great. Sean Connery's Scottish and hates the English. Kind of off to the side there. Okay, so Richard Coeur de Lion died, in fact, overseas. Okay? His younger brother becomes king upon his death. This is the evil Prince John of Robin Hood. Okay? King John, 04, loses Normandy to the King of France. Now, the reason this is important is because Normandy, it's not kind of, it is the ancestral homeland of John and his ancestors. But going back to William. Okay? The name Normandy comes from Norman, which you can divide, and it means Northmen. The original inhabitants of what is called Normandy, were Vikings, who settled on the northern coast of France. Okay, they were Northmen who came down. The Vikings, by the way, I didn't talk about this much with the Old English period. The Vikings, were not only a pretty fierce people, man, did they conquer a lot of territory. Not conquer in the sense that they had one single unitary head. But, one of our great countries of the world has as the root of its name a word that comes from Viking. Russia. The Rus. Okay. That Rus is Viking for red. Okay? If I remember right, was founded by the Vikings. I mean, tell that to a Muscovite today now. Okay? So, John loses Normandy. It's beginning It actually began just a little bit earlier than this, of the 100 Years' War, which is more than 100 years. It's more like 150 Years' War. But we use 100, kind of colloquially, right? So when John loses Normandy, it has important effects on England. People start to focus more on England. Because prior to this time, you want to really get the full version of this, take the history of the English language class next time I'll offer it, which God knows whenever that will be. Prior to time, you had a bunch of English kings, quote unquote English kings, who were French. That is, they didn't speak a lick of English. They didn't understand English, right? So they were essentially French kings sitting on the English throne, right? Which kind of makes all the common English people not really love them that much. And the Plantagenet kings weren't really loved very much. There's one that we're going to come up when we talk about Marie de France, 1154 to 89. Henry II, who marries Eleanor. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Aquitaine's a province in France. One, she's hot. Two, Aquitaine is a large province in France. Okay? So he essentially doubles his. He's not only king of England. Okay? He is king of Normandy and some other properties in France. Right? We'll talk about Henry and Eleanor and Thomas of Becket a little bit later. Okay? But he's one of John's ancestors. So when John comes around and loses Normandy, it's like the South losing South Carolina. It's not done, all right? So that kind of begins the troubles with France and the 100 Years' War. 1215, just 11 years later, Magna Carta is signed. What's Magna Carta? Anybody?
Took away a lot of the power of the kings.
Okay.
So they couldn't seize land, right?
What's it literally mean?
Great Charter.
The Great Charter. Well, what is it a charter of? Liberties. It is the Great Charter of Liberties. John signs this because the barons, all right? The barons have the upper hand. How so? How does a king wage war? What's a king have to do in order to wage a war? Has to raise an army. What else? Pay for that army. So how does the king pay for the army? He raises taxes. Dirty, SOBs. I mean, they just always raise taxes. Okay? They have to raise taxes. This is the Robin Hood story. Why does evil Prince John taxes so much? Because he has wars to fight. Okay? So the barons get tired because they've got people coming to them saying, we don't have any more to give. Plus, the barons have to give more than the everyday ordinary commoner. And they get fed up. And so they pull their troops and they tell John, we are withholding everything until you sign this Charter of Freedoms or Liberties. Well, what's included in Magna Carta? Okay? You have to be charged with something if you're going to be arrested. Anything familiar? Okay? It's the basis for the Constitution. Okay? When the founders came up with the Constitution, and even when Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, Magna Carta was right in the back of their minds. It was in the forefront of their minds. They saw this had been done before. Okay? Magna Carta was a stripping power. And what came right along with Magna Carta was the rise of Parliament. What does the word parliament literally mean? Those of you who know, the Pirates of the Caribbean series.
Parlay.
Bingo! What's parlay mean?
Talk.
Let's talk. It's the place of talk. Yes. But what kind of talk? Well, you have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The House of Lords is pretty and does nothing significant. The House of Commons does everything. Let's talk. A camel is a horse that was designed by a committee, that kind of a thing. They talk, all right? But Parliament did in talking was they pulled even more power from the king. So that if you look at Parliament today, as opposed to Parliament in 1250, Parliament in 1250 did not have a lot of power. What about Parliament today? What happens when Liz dies tomorrow and Charles dies the next day? And William is made king. Deal. Because he has no power whatsoever. He is, it'll be a wonderful ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral and Westminster Abbey. They'll bring down the Stone of Scone from Scotland so we can sit on it and everything. And then what'll he do? He'll be a figurehead. He'll be a pretty face on a poster. Maybe not so pretty face, but that's up to you. Okay? That's it. The King of England has no power today. And that traces itself back to this. All right? So he loses power. Plus, the 100 Years' War is going on now, and it's just not going all that swimmingly well. Skip up a few years to the mid-14th century. Now, before I do that, let me back up for just a second. As a result of this, the Norman Conquest. Okay? I add this because I once had a student, not in this class, but in history of the English language class, talk about Norman the Conqueror. There's nobody named Norman who, okay? The Norman Conquerors, okay? But it's called the Norman Conquest. From roughly 11 to 1300, the dominant language in England is French. And what I mean by the dominant language? Everybody in the aristocracy spoke French. Everybody in power spoke French. Okay? The commoners spoke English. But English was changing. And English would have changed from Anglo-Saxon, and any changes were already beginning in the Anglo-Saxon period. All right? But this is kind of the period of French dominance. And we can actually date, I say 1300, but we can actually change that. It's 50 if you want to. Because by 1250, there's an important shift that occurs. And I'll just give it to you real quickly. Prior to 1250, you have French being brought into the English language. That is, French words being brought into the English language by speakers who are learning French. Okay? For example, business owners. It's a good thing to learn some French so that you can communicate and have commerce with those who are your betters and understand them well and they can understand you well so you don't get ripped off for one thing. All right? So you have English speakers bringing French words into their language. After 1250, and we could date this because of some letters, and there's an act of parliament. After 1250, being brought into the English language by French speakers who are learning English. And if you find someone who is a speaker of a foreign language and they're learning English and they're sitting there and you're talking with them, often do, as they try to express an idea. Okay, charades. What else?
They lapse back.
Exactly. They go back into their language. Why? Because their language has the terms they need. whereas the language they're learning doesn't. And so they go back and they speak what's called a macaronic language. That is, part English, part French. English, if you're from the Southwest, part Spanish, Spanglish. Okay? So what they began to do is they began to borrow French words into the English language, and those French words were adopted. All right? So pre-1250, French words are borrowed by English speakers learning French, because French is the dominant language. After 1250, French words are borrowed by French speakers into English. Why? Because English has already won. That is, by 1250, clear, English was going to remain the language of England. Prior to then, wasn't really sure. Because usually what happens when a people come in and conquer another people? How many of you speak Native American? Yeah, that's what I thought. The Amerindian languages did not become the dominant language. Why? Losers lose. To the victors go the spoils, and that includes language. When the Romans would conquer some territory east or something, the territory off to the east, let's say Syria, in Syriac, its language did not then become the dominant culture of Rome. No, Latin did, which is why Latin is still such an important language, even today, even though it's dead, okay? Because it loans so many words to so many other languages, right? So, this is going on. 1350, however, by 50, most everybody is speaking English. Okay? Put another date right here, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm just using this for a kind of a place marker. Right? And here's why. Henry V, he's the first of the Plantagenet kings, that is, those kings that trace their heritage to him. He's the first of the Plantagenet kings, the first of these French English kings who grew up speaking English. Okay? Look how long that been. He was born in I think it was right around 1385 or so. Hold on, I can tell you. Monarchs. He reigned from 1413 to 22. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was born right around 1385 or so. So, 1385, 300 years after the Norman Conquest. So for 300 years, you don't have an English king who speaks English. Imagine the psychological impact that has on people, okay? So, 1350 to 75. It's a period called the Alliterative Revival. Now, everybody in here fully understands the principles of Anglo-Saxon, right? 4 stressed syllables per line. 3 of them, 2 to 3 of them may alliterate. The 4th one may not, all that kind of stuff. In this period, you have this revival of the practice of alliteration. But it's not like Anglo-Saxon alliteration. For the simple reason that those rules were lost during the roughly 3 years of Middle English. Okay? That is, the native understanding of how to compose that kind of verse died out. So there's this revival of simple alliteration. I mean, consonants that alliterate with each other. C with C, K with K, H with H, that kind of thing. And here's a big difference. Really no rules as to how many alliterating sounds there can be in a line of poetry. So that in Vision of Piers Plowman, you have a line that reads, in a fair, I think I put this up in the class, in a fair field full of folk found I there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And it gets so bad by the late 14th century, keep in mind this is the 14th century, by the late 14th century, that Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales has Chaucer, the pilgrim, the created persona, has Chaucer tell a tale that is full of this alliteration. And the other people make him stop because it's so bad. It's just this constant alliteration. It comes beating into their heads. Okay? 1381. Peasants Revolt. You couple the Peasants Revolt with Magna Carta, okay, and you have a stripping away of more power from the king. Well, why are the peasants revolting? I don't mean that the peasants are revolting. They turn your stomach kind of a thing. Why are they upset? Let me put it that way. Well, if you were a peasant, just take a stab at it. Why would you be upset? Okay, taxes possibly. What else? Say it again. Living conditions. I mean, what did we see happening in Wall Street 2 years ago? Anybody remember? OWS, Occupy Wall Street. What was it all about? Dirty, greedy SOBs at the top versus the 1%, supposedly. It's all a bunch of BS, by the way. Versus the 90%. The reason I say it's all a bunch of BS, the average income, a study was recently done, the average income of the Wall Street protesters is the 70s. And parents of them were in the 5 figures, 6 figures, hundreds of thousands. Okay. And they're the ones complaining against the one, they are the freaking 1%. Okay? Drives me crazy to know it. Well, the peasants were angry because of wages. Because they weren't making wages they thought they ought to be making. So they revolted and were killed, essentially. The mayor of Lanval at the time, who was Richard II, put them down. Okay, but in putting them down, they did lose because in putting them down, the peasants got a lot of sympathy. Okay, because the peasants became important by 13 because of something I haven't mentioned. Anybody knows what kind of went throughout Europe in the 14th century? Plague. Black Death. The Black Death. It came in waves. Okay? How many people died as a result of the plague in the 14th century? A third. A third of the population of Europe. Okay? So we've got roughly 2, 4, 7, 9, 11, 12, 13, 3 is 16, and 3 more is 19, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just about this side of the class and kill them all. Okay? Yeah, this. And that's about what happens in the plague. You know, take California, which has roughly 51 million people, and take away almost the state of Florida from it. Florida has 25 million, but you'd need to get rid of 17 million. Okay, 17 million, we like LA and New York combined. Just empty them. Okay? Pretty severe. So what happens as a result of the plague and all these people dying? There's a worker shortage. Okay? What a great way to deal with unemployment. Okay? I mean, you've got all these jobs that now have to be filled. So how do you get them filled? No. Where do people come from to work in the towns? Because where does the plague hit hardest? In the cities. Why? That's where everybody lives all crammed and close together. If you've never been to Europe or you've never been to England, you know, European cities are not like American cities. American cities grow this way. They sprawl. Okay? Go to Jacksonville, Florida, as an example. Jacksonville, Florida is Duval County, Florida. Duval County is one of the largest counties in the country, size-wise. All right? Okay? In Europe, they build cities this way. Houses on top of houses on top of houses on top of houses. So that, you know, refuse is a problem. Sewage is a problem. Because if you understand how houses were built in the Middle Ages, you'd have a house down here, or a first floor, and then you build another one and it'd have just a slight. And there'd be a floor on top of that with another slight overhang and another slight overhang. And it actually gets to the point where in some towns, you'd have a thing like that. Where in some towns, the people on the top floor could literally go out and shake hands. Well, why do they build them this way? Well, you have chamber pots. You don't have indoor plumbing. So you have chamber pots, and what do you do with your chamber pot? You dump it out the window. So you dump it out the window, and it comes down here, and it comes out and this way on the person below. And in the street, down here, you have essentially a trench right down the middle. So everything would flow into the middle of the street and flow down and flow to the river or stream or whatever the low point was. It might just be a cesspool. Okay? Pretty good illustration of this, even in the 19th century in Les Miserables. Some of the streets, you see those little trenches. You can still see these in England. That is, they haven't gone through, and some of them paved over these little trenches. It's kind of, oh, isn't this great? This is where the used to flow down, you know, while people were walking and eating and, you know, that kind of thing. So the Black Death would just spread like crazy in the cities. And then everybody dies. Right? Think of the scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Bring out your dead, bring out your dead. That's real. They would have people who would go along in carts daily to collect the bodies. Take them out and burn them or bury them. All right? So you then have this shortage of people to work in the towns. To work how? They didn't have factories per se. But there were inns. There were pubs. There were smithies. Okay? There were cartwrights and wainwrights and wheelwrights and all these other skilled trades. So people would leave from the country to go work in the city. To do what? Well, to quote A Knight's Tale, to change their stars. To change their stars. To change fortune. And that could happen if you left the country, the fields, and went into the city. If you had a trade, or if you could learn a trade. So, as a result of the Black Death, you get this rise of the middle class. See, there wasn't really a middle class before then. You had the lower class and the aristocracy. The dukes, the barons, etc. Duke and baron, by the way, are both French terms. Okay? The English aristocracy had one term, earl. And that applied to all of them except for the king. So you get this rise of the middle class. Why? Well, people are moving into the city. They're starting businesses. That is, you live out in the country, and you might discover you're a good brewer. You make some really good ale. Well, you go down and you start up your own business. Okay? So the middle class is the go-betweens. The lower class and the upper class. These people become pretty powerful during this period. Right? So you have the middle class, you have the lower class, you have the upper class. Before I go on to these two things, now would be a good time to mention another way of looking at society, the Middle English period. And this is what's called the three estates. Okay? Estate just meaning level. The three estates of society. You have one, the church. Two, the aristocracy / military. And three, everyone else. Okay? These are the economic producers, the everyone else. We would call them worker bees. These are the protectors / fighters, warriors. Then the church is obviously the church, the clergy. Okay? So you have those different class. I don't want to say levels. Okay? Classes, groups. So if you're not a member of one of these two, automatically this. But if you're a knight, you're automatically this. If you're a member of one of the orders of the church, you're this. Now that could be nun, it could be monk, it could be priest, it could be bishop, it could be pardoner, summoner, friar, all those kinds of things we're going to talk about when we get to Chaucer, etc. Right? And they viewed this as kind of the proper ordering of society. Now, I said I don't want to talk about these as levels, but the levels are above this one. Okay? And they still are, frankly. We just don't have it divided as much like this anymore. What has kind of replaced our clergy, and I don't mean literally, but I mean in terms of this kind of ordering of society. This is more like politics. Politicians. Okay. Who think they're, at the top. Okay. But we're still down here, and what are we? Everybody in here has a number associated with your name. I don't mean your stupid in number. Your social security number. What does that mean? It means you can work. What does it really mean? You can be taxed. It means they have a record of you. Right? Now, back to this for a moment. 1415, the Battle of Agincourt. I'm not going to talk, it's just one of the major battles of Year's War. I mentioned that because Henry V is the leader of that battle, and he's the one who first, of the Plantagenet kings, grew up English. Jump up a few decades. 1485, the Battle of Bosworth Field. This is when Richard III loses to Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor then becomes Henry VII, who will be the father of Henry VIII. Dirty, rotten SOB that we'll talk about later. everything that we know about Richard III, let me rephrase that. Almost everything that we know about Richard III comes from Shakespeare's play by the same name. Okay? And it's false. For the simple reason Shakespeare is writing propaganda. I can't believe Dr. Sherman just said that. Shakespeare, a propagandist? Well, yeah. Because think of when he was writing. Who was on the throne? Henry VII's granddaughter, Elizabeth. A Tudor. Nasty Tudor. She was as bad a piece of work as her father was. Okay, we'll talk about that maybe a little later on. And Richard III was the one who lost. So Shakespeare describes Richard III as just being this absolutely horrible person. I mean, he puts words in his mouth, okay, that, I'm going to play the villain and I'm going to love it. I'm going to eat children, all that kind of stuff. Has him with a hunchback. Okay. The skeleton that was found did have profound scoliosis. If you don't know what scoliosis is, your backbone should be straight like this. Well, this one was like this. Okay? Which would have resulted in his being hunched over like this, but it wouldn't have resulted like Igor and Young Frankenstein with this great big huge lump up here. Okay? And the guy apparently, from his death wounds show, was a warrior, even though he was small of frame, because he had all kinds of wounds. Head was hacked into pieces and his arm was cut and all this kind of stuff. All right? So that's the big, broad overview. Okay. Now, to talk about Marie de France, we have to jump back a little bit to the 12th century. And the throne, or the king, Henry II and his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine. All right? Henry II, I'm going to give you, should I do this now or wait till we get to Chaucer? I'll at least talk about Eleanor. Eleanor was a great patron of the arts. It's during their reign that you really see, for example, the rise of Arthurian literature. Okay? Both French Arthurian literature and what's called Anglo-Norman Arthurian literature. That is this mixture of English and French, okay, Arthurian literature. And Eleanor had working for her, or a member of the court, a clergyman, by the name of Andreas Capellanus. Okay? And Capellanus translated a work of Ovid's. Translated Ovid's Ars Amatoria. Okay. Translated it, and it became the art of love. The art of love. Ars Amatoria. The only problem, as best we can tell, the only problem with this is that when Ovid wrote the Ars Amatoria in the 1st century, okay, Ovid wrote it as a satire. It's essentially a satirical book of advice to dirty old men to how to get beautiful young girls into bed. I don't mean young girls like 10 years old. I mean, 20s. All right? And it's got all kinds of great lines, which would probably, get you killed if you tried them. So Ovid writes this as a satire. Because part of what he's satirizing is Roman culture, which is thoroughly decadent. Okay? Andreas Capellanus translates it and apparently doesn't realize that it's satire. So if you don't realize something is satire and you read it, what do you take it to be as? Serious. Okay? And out of come what's called the tradition of courtly love. Okay? In courtly love, I'll bring in, or I'll make copies for you, a handout that I have. Courtly love involves a whole bunch of rules of how to be a good courtly lover. And courtly refers to at court. That is, the throne of the king, or the palace of the king. Okay? Well, one of the major things, ingredients in courtly love, is that the male's object of desire is usually the queen or the lady of the castle, manor house, or something else like that. In other words, she's what? Married, and he's not. Okay? So adultery is at the heart of the courtly love tradition. I mean, it is written into the very fabric. Okay? Now, she can't just go, oh, well, you're kind of cute. Come on. She has to play hard to get. She has to cover the male, some jobs to perform. Slay the dragon, kill the ogre, kill an enemy, go off and achieve some kind of quest, right? So he would usually do that, and if he did, and he did it right, and he showed that he had courtly behavior, then she would acquiesce and they'd sleep together. Okay? Keeping in mind, if he sleeps with her and she's the queen, what's he doing to the king? To start, and a whole bunch of other things. All right? Now, she loved this stuff to the extent that she actually has set up in the court kind of a religion of love. I mean, there are priests for courtly love, the whole 9 yards. And as I said, in the handle, there's a whole series of rules. For example, when people get married, they shouldn't really get married for passionate love. They get married simply to procreate. Because passionate love, that's illicit love. Passionate, courtly love, that's adulterous love, in other words. Okay? So you don't get married because you fall in love with somebody. You marry because you fall in love with somebody. You get married to just kind of pay the bills and keep the human race going. All right? Real system, if you think about it. Or at least it is to my perspective. I don't think it's not to you. Okay? So, check this up. Well, one of the writers that we're talking about, Marie de France, is writing within this tradition. And Marie de France means Marie of France. She doesn't write in English. She writes in what's called the Breton language, or the language from Brittany. If you, I don't remember, do we have a map back here? We do somewhere. Yeah, page 821. Here's England all here. Brittany is down here, opposite the English Channel from the coast of Cornwall. Okay, what does Brittany mean? Little. This is where people flee from Britain during the Anglo-Saxon invasions. So they set up a Little Britain down here in France, and they bring their own version of Celtic. Breton is a Celtic language, right? That's the context where Marie de France is writing from. And she writes this lay called a Breton lay. She writes this little poem. She writes actually a big series of them. Or not a big. She writes several of them. One of the other ones, I don't remember, is Chivalry. Yeah. There's one in here about a werewolf. Okay. She's pretty cool, actually. The story that she writes is not necessarily original to her. There are other stories of Lanval, this character named Lanval, who is an Arthurian knight. But what she does is that she gives us, in poetic form, this story that reveals many of the rules of the traditional courtly love tradition. Okay? For example, and we'll see this in the poem. In the courtly love tradition, two people who are in love cannot be known. That is, it must stay a secret, especially if it involves a knight and a lady of higher rank. You're not supposed to let everybody know. What's an obvious reason? Well, if the king finds out, the knight's going to get killed. And so is the lady, probably. Jump to Arthur. Because once Arthur finds out about Lancelot, all hell breaks loose. All right? So in Lanval, what we see is we see a courtly lover named Lanval, but he breaks the tradition also. That is, he keeps part of the tradition in that he keeps his love with fairy princess secret for a while, but then he breaks it also because he doesn't show courtesy. See, this idea that we have today of courtesy or manners comes straight out of the courtly love tradition. Okay? Chivalry comes out of the courtly love tradition. Well, what is chivalry? Example of chivalry. Opening a door for a woman, which I know today it means you can get the door slammed in your face, but I still do it. What else do? Opening a door for a woman. If you're going for a walk, where should the man walk? On the outside. Why? So that stagecoaches or horses or now.
Or if they're dumping the chamber pot out, he gets hit.
Cart says, on the chamber pot, he gets hit on the head. If a car comes by, he takes the splash. The whole thing of putting your coat out so that she steps on it and in the water. Okay, pulling the chair out. All of those things. Why? What? Okay. Why else? Really it? Is it just because it gets him sex?
No, he's in love. That's part of the tradition.
He's in love? Is it because she's a weaker vessel?
It's to show dedication or showing interest or showing care. It's not always about.
It's not always about sex. Okay.
It's being attentive.
It could be now. It's being attentive. I'm surprised none of you have said the typical thing, which is actually true. It's putting the woman where? First on a pedestal. Not as one student I had write a paper, a pedal stool. A pedestal, right? Not a pedal stool, pedestal. Or it's putting her first. So if it's putting her first, where is he putting himself?
Second or last.
there is this idea at the heart of chivalry that's humility. The opening the door, who goes in first then? Do you go, oh, here, let me get the door for you? No. Okay. Pulling the chair, who is the first to sit? She is. Every Thanksgiving, I make my kids, when we get ready to eat, what are good manners when you're eating regarding a hostess? She takes the first bite. Usually because she's been the one to do all the cooking and stuff. Okay? But there's this idea of humility into this, not this. Because what else does chivalry involve? A thing in our theory and literature, we're not going to get to Lanval today, called the Pentecost Oath. You'll see when we get to, well, what's the Pentecost Oath involve? What are knights supposed to do? What's their job? What's their function in society? Not just to go kill dragons and ogres.
Protect the women and even the poor.
Protect women and the poor. Keep going. And orphans and innocent. Widows.
Everyone.
What do we have there? It's not everyone.
Those who can't protect themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a restatement of what Christ says in Matthew 25. About those who will inherit the kingdom are those who have done to the least of these. They've took care of the poor. They've fed the hungry. They've clothed the naked. They've visited the widows. Okay. The Pentecost Oath tells the knights to do all this stuff. And I'm not concerned about themselves. So that when you see a knight who is concerned about himself in a story, what are we going to get? Ooh, all kinds of good conflict. Because that knight will get some problems. All right? Like when Ms. Carroll does The Wife of Bath's Tale in a few days or weeks, whenever we get to it. Okay? We're going to see that. Because we're going to see a knight rape a woman. And what happens is we've got to answer a question that Guinevere gives to him. What is it women want? No, not Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt. It's not that movie. Okay? But it's the same kind of question, right? So you see this at the heart of this. This is part of this. This, however, is not adulterous at all. Okay?
Is this where the term knight in shining armor comes from?
Yeah, kind of. And the whole, I mean, even the word chivalry comes from chevalier, which is related to cavalry, guys on horseback. So, literally, kind of etymologically speaking, you can't be chivalrous if you're an infantryman. You got to be one of those, because it just looks better. Right? So, I mean, these are at the heart of this notion. So, we open with Lanval, and what do we find out? And notice in your book, what have your editors done for you? For those of you who read Middle French, you get the Middle French. Okay? And we're told that this is going to be sure about Lanval. Page 189. The king was at Carduel. Arthur, the valiant and courteous, on account of the Scots and Picts who were ravaging the country. Dirty Scots and Picts, you know. They came into the land of Logres. Logres is the Celtic word for England. But that's not an accurate footnote. It's not the Celtic word for England. It's the Celtic word for the heart of Britain. That is kind of the sacred space, if you want, of Britain. Right? And they caused destruction there. And then what are we told? At Pentecost. So we immediately find out They organize time here through the church. It's the Christian calendar. See, Arthur isn't Clive Owen from the King Arthur movie. He is entirely, in all the stories of him, he is entirely a Christian hero. Okay? So what's he doing? There, Cardwell is probably Carlisle, by the way, in southern Scotland. The king's taken up residence there in Carlisle. He's giving out gifts both to counts and noblemen. Why? Because it's still in that tradition of a good king as a gift giver. And he's giving out gifts and stuff to the members of the Round Table, who we are told have no equal in the world. Well, we could jump from right there and go to the beginning of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, because we're going to see that that notion is going to be tested in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But instead, we're going to go on. And so what does he do? He shares out wives and land. No, that doesn't mean they're into wife swapping. These aren't open marriages. This isn't, hey, California in the 1300s or whatever, 1100s. No, it means he gave women in marriage to the knights. Okay? Except for one man. That is, Arthur distributes treasure to all of his knights but one, Lanval, whom he did not remember. So why doesn't Arthur remember Lanval? Is it some fault on Lanval's part? Or is it some oversight on Arthur's part? Okay, let me back up for just a moment. When I say the name King Arthur, what pops into your mind? Little free association. Sean Connery. Okay, let me. Young Sean Connery or old Sean Connery?
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Because Arthur, according to the story, can be young and he can be old. Okay. What else? Knights of the Round Table. Okay. Keep going.
Sword in the Stone. Yeah.
Sword in the stone.
Okay. Keep going.
Camelot.
Camelot. Guinevere. Good or bad?
Good.
Good. Okay. Why?
Supposed to be fair to everybody.
Supposed to be fair to everybody.
Always puts the people first. It's like the general consensus on what you hear.
Yeah, except for Lanval. Nor did any of his men favor Lanval. Why is the table of Arthur round?
So there's a little, so there's no
Bingo. So there's no head. Put a table like this. Generally, someone who sits there or there is at the head of the table. They call the shots. This one, nobody calls the shots. They're all equal. Okay? If you go to Winchester, go to Winchester Cathedral today. Not Winchester Cathedral. Go into the Great Hall at Winchester today and look at the round table that is there. The hall is huge. You go up and you see this big table hanging from the wall, and the table's like, I don't know, 50 feet in diameter. I mean, it is a huge sucker. The table has actually been dated, carbon-14 dated, to the it's either 15th or 14th century. Okay, 1350s, 1450s. And it's got all these, it's got this kind of ring around here, and it's got all these pictures painted of the various knights, except for the one right there. Okay. Kind of interestingly, this image has been repainted. And the person that sits there in this image is a portrait of Henry VIII when he was about 18 years old. And he was a good-looking man when he was young, before he put on 400 pounds. Okay. Oh. What are we told about Lanval? For his valor, his generosity, his beauty, his prowess, most people love him. So what are you doing if you envy somebody or something? What's another way of putting that? Jealous. Why? We're told his valor, that is his courage, his generosity. Which is generosity? He freely gives what he has. His beauty, he's a looker. His prowess, not only his courage. How is prowess different from courage? Yeah. It's his ability. Okay? Most people envied him. Many a one pretended to love him, who wouldn't have complained for a moment if something had befallen the knight. Lanval's just screwed. Everybody is jealous of him, we're told. Okay? He was a king's son of high lineage, far from his heritage, part of the king's household, that is, Arthur's household. He'd spent all his wealth, for the king gave him nothing. Well, how do we know he'd spent all his wealth? We were just told. He's generous. And yet Arthur gives him nothing. Nor did Lanval ask him for anything. Why? Because he doesn't go begging. So Lanval's unhappy, he's sorrowful, and anxious. Poet then addresses the audience. Lords, do not wonder. That is, don't be surprised. A foreign man without support is very sorrowful in another land when he does not know where to seek help. And I think that could be Marie de France just kind of subtly saying, I'm a foreigner in a land, I don't really know where to seek help. Help. Okay? The knight of whom I'm telling you, we're told, had so well, and he gets on his horse one day and went off to enjoy himself. What that means is he rides off into the forest to get away from everybody else. Because the only way he can enjoy himself is to be alone. And so what does he do? He goes off, he lets the horse loose, the horse goes off and rolls in the meadow. And he folds down his cloak and lays down his head. Now, they didn't necessarily know this at the time, but we do from having read medieval literature. Never, ever go off on a summer's day into the woods, let your horse run free, and go to sleep under a tree by a babbling brook. Time is the fairies will come get you. Okay? We see it happen repeatedly in medieval literature. To the extent that it made many people believe fairies were real. That people were really taken to the other world. Usually as slaves to work or as sex slaves. I'm not kidding here. Okay? So he goes to sleep because he sees nothing that pleases him. He's fed up with life. Read a thing just last night. Johnny Cash in the mid-90s went to Nickajack Cave in Chattanooga. And he says, he went in with a flashlight and life just totally was horrible. He was at the end of his rope. And he thought he was just going to walk in as far as he could go and lay down and die. And he walks in and his flashlight goes out and he keeps walking. He said, I was in for a mile and I laid down to die and I felt a presence that said, nope, not done with you yet, get up. And he gets up and leaves. Well, that's not what happens to Lanval. But Lanval does have the same mentality. Why on? And he looks down and he sees two maidens coming. He'd never seen any more beautiful. Okay, now who's king? Who's the king that he serves? Arthur. Who's Arthur's queen? Guinevere. What's Guinevere supposed to look like? If you saw the Oscars, Catherine Zeta-Jones. Just hot, okay? I mean, she is supposed to be gorgeous, and she knows it. That's Guinevere's problem. And he sees two maidens, and they are more beautiful than any woman he's ever seen. Richly dressed, very tightly laced, and it probably means very form-fitting dresses. in tunics of dark purple. They had lovely faces, the elders carrying basins of gold. Okay, and the other one carries a towel. So they're coming up like they're going to give him a bath. He's going, yes. Okay. One's carrying a basin, water basin of gold, and the other one a towel. They go right along and they come to him. Notice what he does. He's lying down watching all this. They come to him and they stop at his feet, and what does he do? He stands up. Why? Chivalry. A woman enters the room, a man stands up. Okay? Great depiction of the other tangent. Great depiction of this. Oh, what was that movie? Movie about a dance teacher in New York, played by Antonio Banderas. Anybody know the movie I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Take the Lead. Fantastic movie. Antonio Banderas, just being Antonio Banderas is enough, but you know. As this dance teacher goes into the school, I think it is in Harlem, because he wants to teach the kids how to dance. But for him, it's not teaching just how to dance. It's teaching what? Respect. Man of behavior. And so he's sitting there waiting for the principal in her office, or out her auntie office, and he's sitting there. He's got this kid next to him who's there for detention or something. And a woman comes in the room and he stands up. And then he sits down. And another one, and he stands up and he sits down. And he's like, kid next to him, man, what are you doing? He goes, well, a woman enters the room. The man stands up. And he goes, at least get their number. He goes, no, you don't understand. And the whole thing is essentially about teaching not only respect for themselves, chivalry. Respect. Many of which many of the boys have no idea. Okay? So, they greet him, and they say, Sir Lanval, my lady, who is most noble, wise, and beautiful, sent us for you. Come along. We'll take you to her. Look, it's right here. And he goes with him. He doesn't think about his horse. Why? Who cares about a horse when these two beautiful women are taking him to their lady? And he goes up and he sees this beautiful tent. And we get this long description about how beautiful the tent is, and it's compared to other people's tents and stuff. And then we're told inside the tent, line 93, was the maiden. Her beauty surpassed the lily and the new rose when they bloom in summer. Woo! She lay on a very beautiful bed. Notice, shut up when he comes in. The sheets were worth a castle. I don't know, this was like 5,000 count or something, you know. Nothing but her shift. What does it mean she's in nothing but her shift? Yeah, well, or negligee. She's been to Fredericks of, I don't know, London, I guess, you know. Her body was very elegant and comely. She had thrown on for warmth a costly mantle of white ermine. White ermine. Wealthy and royalty. Okay? Lined with Alexandrine silk. Her side was entirely uncovered. Her face, her neck, and her breast. Okay, so she's lying there in a sheer shimmy thing, and she throws on a mantle to keep herself warm. But from the description, what does it cover? Yeah, her feet, I don't know. Her neck, maybe, the back part. Because everything else is exposed. She was whiter than hawthorn blossom. White meaning beauty. Okay. In other words, she doesn't do anything out in. Okay. A real lady does not get tanned. What a different mentality, right? Yeah, I bet he did. He sees this beautiful half-naked woman lying there, and he's going to go, no, I don't think so. And she calls to him, and he sat down in front of the bed. And she says, Lanval, handsome friend, for you I have come out of my own land. No, not told where that is. If I have come, I have come from afar to look for you. It's like she already knew about Lionheart. If you are valiant and courteous, no emperor, count, or king ever had such joy or good fortune. In other words, if you be valiant and courteous, oh, are you going to be happy? For I love you more than... He looked at her, saw that she was beautiful. Love stung him with a spark that lit and inflamed his heart. Probably as well. He responded fittingly. Beautiful one, if it please you that such joy should come to me, as to have you consent to love me, you could never command anything that I would not do to the best of my power. Courtly love, he has just sworn himself to you. Command me to do your will, and I will. We're going to hear Sir Gawain do the exact same thing. A little bit different situation. Okay. I would not do to the best of my power, be folly or wisdom. In other words, if you tell me to jump off the top tower of the Golden Gate Bridge, I'll do it. That would. I will do what you command. For you, I will give up everyone. I never wish to part from you. This is what I most desire. And she grants him her love and her body. Notice the poet doesn't equate the two. Love is different. Okay? Now Lanval is on the right path. Okay, compare what he had back at Arthur's court. Nobody loved him. Everybody was jealous of him. So he goes off into the forest and he finds her, and the poet's kind of going, way to go. Okay? She gave him still one more gift. What else can she give him? She gave him her love, that is, and she gave him her body. Okay, so body and soul. He'll never again want anything without having as much of it as he likes. Let him give and spend generously. She will provide him with enough. Okay? So he gets her body and soul, and he will never lack anything. Wealth, clothes, food. It's kind of like the more he gives away, the more he gets. Lanval is very well situated, the more rich. She says to him, but one thing I command and beg. You'll lose me forever if this love should be known. You can't see me again or have possession of my body. Notice she wants to make it clear. You'll lose my heart, but almost more importantly, you lose. He says, no, don't worry about that. And so he lays down beside her on the bed, and we find out now Lanval is well lodged. All afternoon he stays there until the evening, and then she says, you have to go. You go on, I'll remain here. When you want to talk with me, and I'll be there. It's kind of like a bad song from the 70s. Okay? He's delighted. He kisses her. He gets up. His maidens leave him out. And what does he do when he goes home? When he goes back to Carlisle, he sees his men, okay, dressed in new livery, new clothes. He doesn't say anything. Okay? We're told his horse has been richly looked after. He goes to his lodging, line 2002. He finds his men handsomely dressed. He has a rich table. Now, what was he like that morning? Poor. He had no money left. Never a rich table, meaning it gives and gives and gives. People keep coming and the food never stops flowing. All right? But no one knew where he got this from. It's line 205. That's where we will pick up on Thursday. And I'll have your exams on Thursday.